Well, hello, lovely listeners. Today I have the honour of speaking with Laura Martin. Laura, and I need to understand this, Laura, a luxury IBS anxiety and trauma specialist. And she helps women to reclaim their health and confidence so they can show up, be seen, and lead boldly. Laura is also the founder of the Healing to Happy brand and is known for her unique approach to gut health and mental wellness. Laura herself battled her way through trauma, loss, addictions, and found herself with a surplus of health issues such as IBS, hormonal imbalances, skin problems, which I can relate to. And I think it's fair to say, Laura, that you just didn't get the answers you were looking for, so had to do your own research, and you kept going and you kept going and you kept going, and that's how you've evolved what you now give to other women. So I'm intrigued to know what that looked like, because in terms of IBS, I suffered when I was younger. I still say I've got a crap gut, I reckon, and I suffer with acne rosacea, although that's a lot better now. But I still flush a lot, especially if I have a curry or something. It just goes straight to my face. So yeah, so welcome, Laura. Enough of my health ailments, and it's amazing to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, me too. So the listeners and I would love to know more about Laura, your backstory, what you went through. Obviously, you've written about some of it in that bio. But, you know, what has your journey been leading up to this point, and how you started doing your whole, healing brand? I'm intrigued how all that started, because it was about 2016 when your journey started, was it? Yeah.
It was 2016. I was living in Bangkok, Thailand, and my life was a hot freaking mess. It was, you're living in Asia for one, and Bangkok for two. I had lost my mom unexpectedly at 22 years old, so 2014. And I went to Asia to go find myself. But after something like that, it doesn't matter where you live, you're going to go lose yourself, right? Unless you have a stable foundation, right? And I didn't have one. That wasn't something that I knew. I didn't have one my whole life. And so I found myself using drugs, drinking extensively, over exercising, under eating, in a domestically violent relationship. And just, I was at the calibration of what I thought I was worthy of in that, which happens, not a thing we want, but it happens. And it came to a moment, I remember I was 24 and I was sitting on my then boyfriend's apartment. We had just had a physical altercation. I didn't know if I could go any further in my life. I was you hit your rock bottom, and you have two choices. You can either continue on that path that you're on, which has a shorter expiration date than you would choose, or you get your butt off the ground and you do the hard thing that you've been avoiding with all these drugs and alcohol and all this kind of stuff. And I chose the latter. And it was that moment when I also sat down with my friend about a day later, and I was like, hey, this is what's going on. Everyone knew, you could see it on my body, everything I was doing, but no one knew how to have a conversation. And so when I finally sat down with her, she was like, well, you have a really messed up and intense relationship with food, because I was avoiding it. That was my way of coping with things, of being very strict with nutrition. She's like, you have a very strict way of dealing with nutrition. So why don't you actually go learn about it? Instead of being afraid of it, why don't you go make friends with it? And I was like, sure, why not? I don't know what I'm doing right now. I'm teaching English. I'm partying all the time. Sure. I'm in for anything right now. So I went, and at that time I had IBS. I hadn't had a period, my cycle, for about 3 years. It took me 5 years to finally get it back, 6.5 to get it consistent. I had, panic attacks all the time, suicidal ideation. I had hypothyroidism. I had zero estrogen in my body. Doctors couldn't figure out what was going on, scans and scopes and all the funny things and funny places. And so when I was learning in school, it was let's just keep eliminating more and more and more foods. This is the common thing we see in this field. I have a history of an eating disorder. I had one since I was like 13 years old. That took a long time to recover from. So for me, I was like, perfect. I will nail this. Like, I am so good at this. And the whole orthorexic thing started, and my symptoms just kept getting worse and worse, no matter how healthy I was eating, and led down this whole rabbit hole of,
What's that, Laura? Orthorexic?
Orthorexic is when you become obsessed with health food.
Right.
So it's one of these things where like, it's very common nowadays. It's like, it's not my macros. It doesn't have this color. It's gluten, it's dairy, it's soy, it's lectins. It's this kind of thing. Like, I was at the point where I had eliminated 13 different food groups. I was eating soups and smoothies. I was 40 pounds underweight than what I am right now. I was a nightmare to be around. It was like, oh my God, something touched it. Like, having all these food fears, all these eliminations, all these things, because that's what I was learning in school. Right? Like, instead of learning what actually worked for me and what I now teach, I was like, oh, like, this is what I'm learning. This is what I read. This is like what all the textbooks say. Like, sure, this has to be right. Why would I question it? And then we get to this point and nothing's working. I'm like 3 years into it. I'm like, okay, like, I'm helping all these people, but I am horribly in pain. And it got to this point that it started with a skin rash on my back, and it went all the way up my body, started in like, went up my armpit. And then on I think it was my 25th birthday, I had to deliver a speech in front of like 100 people, no biggie, with this giant rash that was broken out on top of my face. And I was supposed to be talking about gut health. And I proceeded because I was like, okay. But after that moment, it was like, we really got to look at this, because if all the things you're teaching and preaching worked, that would not be happening right now. Right? Yeah. Like, you'd be able to eat normally. Your skin wouldn't look like this. Your mental health wouldn't be like this. And I constantly felt like a fraud. And so I started to untangle this whole thing, because I had a naturopath that talked to me a year or so prior, because I went to her just like, what the actual heck is wrong with me? Like, I am so confused. And she's like, do you want to talk about how your trauma is related to all this? And I was like, no. And I took a whole year to go full circle to try everything, and then came back to this whole gut brain connection, the vagus nerve, nervous system work, metabolism, and how that's damaged through all these years of one big T trauma, and now these restrictive dieting, and like really looking at the body from a holistic approach instead of just the microbiome. And went on and got the education and the certifications and things around that, and suddenly playing with my methods, and people wanted to work with me, and traveling around and started speaking, and it's now helped hundreds of women do the same thing I've done. It's just honestly bananas.
Well, I need some holes filling in there, some gaps filling in. Right. So you were speaking and teaching about gut health when you still had problems. So how did you get into that? Because you jumped from abusive relationship to your friends saying perhaps you should research nutrition, to all of a sudden speaking in front of 100 people. So can you join the dots?
So I went to school to become a health coach, right? So I was studying, doing all these kind of things, and people saw me go from, because I was Bangkok is large but small. I had a lot of friends in the foreigner community, and they saw me go from this party fiend, I was very much out every single day, to now, I was always in the gym, but I was like being healthy. I wasn't going out. I was in bed all the time, like in a good way, not like in a depressed way, but like I was staying in. I like had these fierce boundaries. I got myself out of that relationship, and people were like, wait, what are you doing? And so it started with just health. And then as I proceeded to go on health, I was like, but my gut is still wrecked. So I went and I got like a second certification in gut health to really start to understand it. And I just started speaking to people. I started like posting on Instagram what I was doing. And again, since it was a small community, they're like, oh, I actually have digestive issues. I have this relationship with food. And it started to go from there. And then universities, panels, hospitals, and things like that started to get me on board with different projects and stuff. And from there, just started speaking. And it really like, it was just this organic thing that was like, poof. And I was like, oh, okay, like this is what needed to be said. But on the back end, I still had all this other crap that was happening, because I was just reiterating the things that I was learning in school, and I feel like a lot of us do this. It's like, oh, this is what I've learned. let me see how I can teach it. And I'm applying it to myself, and I'm quote unquote the gut health queen, but like my body isn't okay. Like, yes, I'm like pooping regularly now, but my skin's doing this now. And I have, these panic attacks, and I have these migraines, and I have this heartburn. Like, there's all these other things that are happening because they're all connected to the gut and other organs of elimination that I wasn't focusing on. And then that kind of whole thing happened on my face. And I was like, we're doing this wrong. Like, we are doing this wrong because we're going by textbook. And if that stuff worked, if low FODMAP and, the Whole30 and all that kind of stuff worked, why do we have to keep coming back to it every single 30 days? And that's kind of where the transmission and all that kind of stuff started to bloom and move away from the standard elimination diets, like things like that. Plus the reflection of like, wow, this is just really disordered eating that I have at the end of the day. If I'm like only eating a certain handful of green foods, and I have to eat at these certain times on the dot, and I can only have soups and smoothies, it's like that mirror shown in your face where it's like, that's not actually healthy. Like, you have no freedom to your life there. Like, even though you're standing and you're known for this stuff, it's like, this is so unfulfilling because it's so fake, and it got to that point, and then now here we are, and kind of connecting all the dots between how the body actually works in a way that doesn't feel so scary, in a way that actually can repair it as opposed to manage it, and just kind of looking at the full picture in that spectrum.
So what did the lady that said to you about trauma,
Yeah.
what did that look like? And are you happy to share what that was?
Yeah. So her name is Penny. Love her. She was my naturopath when I was living in Thailand. And yeah, so she came to me. I had been working with her for a while, right? I've spoken on stages with her, and I was like, why am I still a hot mess? Like, what the heck? And she looked at me and she's like, well, she knew my life. She knew my mom had passed. She'd known about, the history of trauma in my life and then the current relationship. She was like, one, you really need to gain weight. Like, you have this whole fear around food. Like, I'm just reflecting that back to you. And two, like, you have a lot that's happened in your life that obsessing about dieting isn't gonna fix that. And like the avoidance of that, because that's what I was doing. I was hyper vigilant on keeping my work very strong and then keeping my diet very strong. Because if I'm obsessing about food and I'm obsessing about work, I don't have to think about the things that hurt my heart, but the things that hurt my heart are the things that are causing this fight or flight response in my body. So the gut brain connection. And when we have big T trauma and we have things that happen in our life, our vagus nerve, which is our longest cranial nerve that controls every single thing in our body, plus it gives off these anti-inflammatories and all this stuff, controls our internal thermostat, everything. When we have big T trauma, it shuts down because it gets hyperstimulated. So this is why you see a lot of the like cold plunges or humming and cold showers and this whole vagus thing that's happening right now. Because that's what people are starting to realize, is that we're singularly just looking at, okay, like what foods can I eat? Or more like commonly is what foods can I avoid, like to heal my gut? And what we actually have to be focusing on is like, how do we get this communication to actually rev back up? So the juices and, the enzymes and the antibacterials and the things that are happening naturally in our body can actually start to rev back up. And so that's what she was trying to address to me. But the question, like, do you want to deal with, she said, do you want to deal with your depression and anxiety? And I was like, no, like that question didn't fit right for me at that moment in my life. Whereas if she explained it in like a science way, I probably would have been like, oh yeah, like that makes so much sense. But it was this whole, like, I don't want to go to therapy right now. Like, I'm actually actively avoiding therapy. And so I'm looking at the body. And so after I understood like the science part of the body and how it was all in there, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess we'll look at that now. And kind of worked through all of that.
So are you a logical left brainer then, if you've got to have science too? Right, okay.
Yes, I love science.
So what did that involve then? So obviously you got to a point where it felt right and you felt more comfortable with it. So what did she actually do to help you release the trauma?
Yeah, so I actually didn't work with her on releasing the trauma. I went to traditional therapy for a long time. I did EMDR, and I really went into self-development, but in a different type of way, because we do this whole I think self-development can be kind of spiritual bypassing at a lot of times, like you're not actually looking at things. And then I went on, of course, to go study again, to study and do trauma support therapy and things like that. And really focusing on how to get my body safe in the present moment. Because realistically, yes, I understood what happened in my past, right? But I kept going back and revisiting my past and talking about the things that happened, and my body would have a flare up, right? Because my body couldn't handle doing that. She didn't feel safe here. She was already stuck in fight or flight. So anytime we went back to talk about my past, my body was like, oh, we're extra freaked out right now. And so really working on getting my body to be present and be calm in the chaos. So meditation, just doing the 5 senses thing, working through that in therapy. Like I said, EMDR.
What's EMDR?
That is, I can't even remember the actual words of it, but you go through it. Some therapists have it. It's like an extra thing on there, but they do this like hypnosis, like they shake their finger really fast in front of it and gets you into a hypnotic state where it's like safe for your body to actually go back and go and revisit that. But you're also have a point in your nervous system and in the transgression where you have a safety point. And so that helps you when you are in your day-to-day life to reclaim that safety point when you're starting to feel dysregulated. And then kind of doing my own studies, right? Like self-studying on what the nervous system is, how the 3 stages of the ventral vagus nerve, and how you can kind of identify like ventral is when we're safe. And this is when we're like, quote unquote, call it like the green zones, where we're at the top of the ladder, like everything around us. This is when we're in flow. This is when our immunity is up to date. This is when we can connect with people and things like that. And then we move into our sympathetic, which I think is quite commonly talked about nowadays, but I call this like my spicy Latina. It's like when we're fight or flight and it's like salty and like things where you're like agitated and things like that. And then the third one is dorsal, when we just completely shut down. That's like the blue zone, not in the happy way, but like the depressed, and you're like, I'm disconnected, I give up, I'm done. And being able to play with that and kind of go through these scenarios of when I'm in each one, so you can actually feel that in your present moment, can help to recalibrate your nervous system, which then is safe enough to go and revisit the past traumas and do things like that. In my personal opinion, everyone has their own different ways of doing things. This is just what worked for me. And then also healing my eating disorder, like getting comfortable around food and being able to not bypass how my body felt. You know, if I was feeling scared, do I really have to go do 18 HIIT workouts right now? Do I have, you know, like, can I sit in the discomfort of when something arises instead of trying to escape it with exercising or dieting or work? Is really kind of just sitting in those moments.
So how long so you were doing different things with this therapist, and I guess it was a bit of trial and error. How did you know it was working? You know, you said it worked for you. It doesn't work for everyone. Maybe people have got their own methods, but how did you sort of know what fundamentally changed?
Yeah, good question. It was bit by bit, right? Like I had lived in Asia for 6 years. And so I got to a point with this one therapist who I did EMDR with, and I finally felt safe enough to move home. You know, I felt like I was connecting with my family again. And I remember saying this to my friends. I was like, you know, like I felt like I needed to build this other life and to do all these things. And I was like, actually, like, not that I want to like move next door to my family and things like that, but like I'm safe enough to go back to the States. And I feel good about that. And then things like I'm safe enough I'm an athlete my whole life. So I loved HIIT training and like throwing my body around, and like, that is not good for someone that is trying to heal their nervous system. Like I know, whatever, but like, I finally started to get myself down to, okay, like I can do Pilates once a week. Okay, now it's twice a week. Now that's solely the only workouts I do nowadays. And now we're reintegrating lifting again. Being in relationship, I was single and I repelled and rejected dating because it was so scary. And I felt I was unlovable. And I felt, you know, I have too much damage. I have these things. Whereas I was getting to a point where I was like, oh, like I'm actively moving back to the States so I can find a husband. And 3 weeks later, I met the love of my life and we've been together since and things like that. But it's, you know, I started to just kind of feel safer in different elements of my life, and my body was healing. I was sleeping through the night. I hadn't had digestive issues in a long time, but yeah, I would just say my skin, my hair, my nails, I got my cycle back. That was a big one because I really do want to be a mother. And just little elements like that. Because I know a lot of us, when we go into things, it's like we pick this singular thing, right? Like, I want to fix X. And we forget to look at the big circle that's around it, right? Like our relationships, our connections, our sisterhood, our friendships, our, independence, our solo time, our self-care, how are we sleeping? How are we pooping? How is our PMS? If we have any, do we? Like, all these kind of things, like we have to look at all the different pillars of it. And that was my awakening, because I was looking at like, okay, if I heal my body at this arena, then I'll be complete. If I do this, then I'll be complete. And it's like, no, it's all the little pillars within it. And it takes time, right? Like, this journey was how old am I right now? It was like a 5-year, like, how old? About 5 years, 4 years, 5 years of really setting this in stone. And like you said earlier, like, you just try different methods. Right? Like, that's it, is like, we get so scared. We live in this, what if it doesn't work? And it's like, but what if it does? Can you get yourself off that fence to actually try things that you might be sitting there and you're like, that sounds crazy. Like, I don't want to do that. That sounds crazy. And I was like, why not? Like, if it will get me off this ground and get my brain to be a little bit more clean and like get my body into calibration, I am willing to try anything at this point. And so really kind of grappling with that kind of stuff until you find what works for you. You're going to fail. There's going to be frustrations. There's going to be shame. There's going to be things that don't work out, but like, we have to be willing to try,
Given your scientific preferences, do you buy into, the energy of the body and the shifting of the energy, which has allowed the healing to happen?
100%. Yeah. There's a lot of like energy healing, that whole like shadow work stuff, feminine and masculine energy, and kind of understanding that dynamic. Not so much like that's the soul thing, because that's who I work a lot with, is like visionary leaders, right? So it's all the shadow work. It's all like the thing that always comes up. Like, I have a migraine. That means like I'm processing trauma and things. And I'm like, yes. And like, that also is like a copper deficiency and some neuroinflammation. Like, there's also the human body that we need to take care of. And so I think I know it's a blending of the two, because we can go too far one way where it's like only energy, and we can go the other way where it's only science. And it's really coming into this understanding that it takes the body, mind, soul to really come into play to heal the whole picture.
Yeah. I want to hear a little bit about your husband now, or husband to be.
Yeah, his name is Elvis.
So 3 weeks into being back in the States.
Yeah.
So what was the story there?
Yeah, so I literally moved home to find a husband. I was like, I'm freaking ready for this. Like, I am done. Like, I got to the point I was like, okay, like, I have this success, right, in Asia doing all this stuff. And I was like, really, what is it worth if I'm alone? Like, I know I can, I'm happy, I'm fine, but like, I'm away from my family, I'm away from these things. And I kept meditating, and this is gonna sound absolutely bonkers, y'all. Like, I get it, but I kept meditating. And this guy with his anchor tattoo kept coming into my meditation, holding our baby girl, giving me coffee. And I'm like, I'm looking at houses to go buy on the island, like, and I get this vibe, it's back in the States. And I'm like, I just don't have time for you right now. Like, I can't, like, you don't align with the plan. But it finally got to be so much. And so 3 weeks before I boarded a flight, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna shut the office in Thailand, keep the one in Singapore open, shut the office in Thailand, whatever. It was just kind of to get a visa. But to do that, but I was like, whatever. My assistant, it was fine because it's all digital anyways. And so I was like, okay, went back. 3 weeks later, I'm on Bumble, as we do. And like, to the point that my going away party, my friends threw me a pop, like we had a yacht and things to go and have champagne and celebrate the 6 years. But they had a pop-up like bachelorette party because they like knew that's what my plan was. And I was like, you guys are so cute. Anyways, got home. 3 weeks later, I'm on Bumble. This guy will not stop annoying me. Just kidding. And he's like, just keeps calling, and I'm not used to someone calling. Like, I haven't dated in 2.5 years. I'm like, okay. And then finally we meet, and like, it's just this like spark, which sounds cliche again, but it was. And then on our second date, he's like wearing a t-shirt and it like lifts up and there's an anchor tattoo on his shoulder. And I was like, what? And I thought I was lying. So I went back to my journals, thank goodness for journaling, and like flipped through and I was like, oh my goodness, on August 5th, like this is what I wrote. And I met him October 10th. And I was like, okay, like what the heck? And then like, I know. And like even months prior to that, like I was talking to my assistant about like in Asia, I was like, something keeps calling me about Texas. Like, I don't really know. Like, I don't know anyone in Texas. I don't know. And she's like, in her eyes, like, because at the time she was still like coming to the office. And I was like, don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. Like, this was like months prior. And then I ended up meeting him. And then I think our third date, he was like, oh, he's a pilot. He's like, I just got transferred to Texas. So do you want to come? So I was like, I can't. There's too many alignments right now. This is too much for me.
So, oh wow, right. So, and you've been together. So, how long have you been together?
I mean, not that long. It's only been 1.5 years, but definitely one of those things where it's like been so nice because he has also amplified this experience of like healing my eat, because he has no shame around food or anything like that. He's like this fit guy, but he's not this like macro counting like the people I'm used to being around. So he makes food fun. Like he makes this whole experience of life more fun. And like he's a Cancer. I don't know if you're into astrology, but he's very like, be in the home, be quiet, like this whole shell thing. And I'm like, like running around. So it's nice to be in this co-regulation with each other that I had been so afraid of for years, because I was like, oh, like you don't know me, you can't love me, things like that. But to be in a space where it's like, oh, like it's not too much with someone, if you're not relying on that other person to heal you, but you can actually hold it in your own space and articulate like, this is what I'm going through, and have them kind of mirror back to you, it can be such a healing space. It's one of those things that like, I'm like, all right, universe, like I see why this was brought into this certain pathway, because that was the last little cherry that needed to be fixed.
Wow. I don't know if you know, I follow a couple of brothers called Guy and Alan Ferdman. They're out in the States. And they're very into their energy, so that they've done the whole personal growth, self-development, did a lot of stuff with Landmark. I don't know if you've heard of Landmark, but they're a big program. And then they've sort of progressed, and where they are now is they're like, this is when personal development and the mindset doesn't work anymore. You're still repeating the same bloody mistakes. So they've now gone into this energy work, which they've been doing for a few years, and sharing it on their podcasts and stuff. And it sounded to me, when you were just talking then, quite a similar thing, being in that space with your partner, and you're not looking to be fixed, but it's that supportive, secure, safe space for you to be who you are, warts and all. And and not have somebody go bye. Do you know what I mean? And they said that is the power of healing. We all try and do it alone, but to have that, that especially with that special somebody, is hugely powerful and hugely releasing. And they're very much about releasing the stagnant energy that's in your body. Now we know there's lots of things that can do that, acupuncture being one of them. That's something I did for years, certainly for my skin. Reiki, I'm a Reiki healer, so I work with energy as well. But it's interesting to hear your journey, because you've gone very science, very, like you said, it was all about diet, but it's not all about diet. It's about lots of things. And I think stress and anxiety are huge contributors to certainly the gut, right? So you touched then on, you had a couple of offices in Asia. What took you to Asia in particular?
Yeah, so I had always had, this sounds so silly, I had an obsession with elephants and children. And so my mom, just before she passed, so she passed in November, and I graduated university half a semester early. Half a semester. And so she's like, well, before you go, like do the big world things, like to make up for all the things that I've done, I want to send you on a trip abroad. You love elephants, you love babies. why not go to an elephant sanctuary and then go, or backwards, why not go to an orphanage and then to an elephant sanctuary over in Thailand? And I was like, okay. And then she ended up passing. So it was still in the plan, but my dad had to front the bill. So I had to give them both that kind of thing. But yeah, it was just kind of that thing. And then by the time I came back, so I was there for 2 months doing the volunteer work. And then I stayed an extra month because I met that boy who changed my whole life, and not the best way, but also the best way. And I moved back to America. And after something like that, like I said, I didn't know. I was 22. I have no idea. My life has always been a hot mess. I'm a heavy drinker, heavy party. I have no idea how to handle things. I worked my booty off for 3 months, saved a whole bunch of money, sold everything I owned, and bought a one-way ticket. And I was like, I will figure it out when I get there, but I'm going to go back because I liked who I was there, because nothing, maybe you've experienced it, but like when you go back to your parents' house, everything is triggering. You're like, why? I don't act this way. Why am I like this? Like, that's how I felt about being in America. I was like, I'm such a better person when I'm in Asia. Let me go chase that. And you're 22, your prefrontal cortex isn't made up yet. So you're like, let's do it. I'm not like, I have no critical thinking right now. And I went, and yeah, I was going to only stay for about a year teaching. I met a girl at all you can drink ladies night, and she's like, my school's hiring. I was like, I'm not a teacher. I have no idea how to do that. She's like, my school. And they ended up hiring me. God bless them. And then, yeah, started my business from there and just kind of went with it.
So the business that you had over there, and obviously you said you kept one of the offices, but you closed the other one, and your priorities had shifted, and all of a sudden, you wanted to meet somebody. So what did that business consist of in Asia? And is it still the same business you've got now?
Yeah, it's consulting. Yeah. So it's consulting and courses, and the same thing I was doing. More so, I was doing a lot of panels and speaking and workshops. I don't do that in person anymore because of everything. And now we have a broader reach while we just do it online. So I just do that kind of stuff online now, which has been fabulous. But Thailand, I mean, honestly, that one was open just for a visa. Don't come get me, but whatever. Not there anymore, so it doesn't matter. And then our other one's still in Singapore.
Cool. And do you have an ideal, or do you have a typical client? I know it's mainly women. Is it just women that you deal with?
Yeah, it's just women. I've worked with men, specifically the men I work with. Either is I've worked with their wives and they've seen what's happened with their wives, and they're like, why does she have so much energy? And then they come and work with me. Or ex-bodybuilders that are trying to recover their metabolism after years of pumping themselves full of steroids, and they're like, what's happening? Like all that kind of stuff. But I relate better with women. We can talk about spirit, we can talk about these things. And it's not to say that, men don't get that, but there's just that kind of connection. But yeah, so the women usually in that age of like, I'm ready to settle down in my life. No more partying. We're not at the age of like having all the kids yet. We're like in that in between. It's usually 28 to 44-ish arena that have some type of IBS, usually have been through trauma. They're struggling with, they've done the self-development things, but they can't get to quote unquote there. There's that one piece, and usually it's that piece where I haven't connected to my body yet. I don't know how she works. I don't really know how to eat other than some type of diet and restriction. And the things that I've been doing haven't been working. So how do I recalibrate and reframe this so I actually feel safe in my body again?
And a couple of things. So when you talked about your eating disorder, was it anorexia?
Both. So I started with bulimia, and then I went to anorexia, and then I went to orthorexia.
Okay, right. Yeah, a close friend of mine has suffered with both from her 20s, maybe even late teens. And although she's a lot better, she's not, I don't think she's 100%, because I still see, the very small portions and all of that sort of stuff. So what would you say was the biggest thing that cured you of the eating disorders, if there is,
Yeah, I can't name like one specific thing. But there's a few that come to mind. One that changed the trajectory of what I was doing, because I was confusing, even though I wasn't as orthorexic, I wasn't like weighing my food and doing that kind of stuff anymore. I was swimming in the on an island in Thailand. And one of my friends, I was like, I'm frustrated with the stagnancy of my business. Like, what do you think is going on? She's also an entrepreneur. She's like, can I reflect something back? Really honest with you. And I was like, ugh. You're like, soul is like, I guess, like, and she's like, do you really think you have a healthy relationship with food? And of course, my ego defended back, being like, oh, like, yes, what do you mean? And really, after I looked at it, I was like, no, like, I haven't had pasta in I don't know how many years. I could never eat a pizza or a burger. I hardly ever drank. Like, I don't know what fun is. I don't know what pleasure is. Like, realistically, no, I'm not. And so that was a wake up thing. And then after that realization, it was like, but how? Right? Like, now what? Now I have this awareness. Now what? Because I can't actually be like, okay, I'm going to go order a pizza. Like, that thought would make me poop my pants. Like, I would be so scared that would happen. But it was slow integrations of like sitting down at the table and going to a restaurant and not looking at the menu. Because I would always look at the menu beforehand because I wanted to plan out what I had, because it would give me too much anxiety. I was like, what if we just showed up and we like let that anxiety come over us? What does that feel like? Again, doing therapy really worked on that, really being able to identify like what mind is mine and what mind is my eating disorder brain, which truthfully, I don't think will ever go away, right? I have these thoughts constantly my brain is doing that, especially when I'm around super skinny people or super strict people or super quote unquote disciplined people. Like, my brain still does that, but it's able to sit there and be like, that thought is not mine. Like, that is not what I want to do. And my bigger why was I want children. My biggest thing is I want children, and I don't want this reflected on my children. As this conscious parenting thing and this really awareness of like how my eating disorder came about and all these kind of things. I was like, I see this in how it's run in my family, and it stops with me. Like, I'm taking ownership over that. It stops with me. And so my focus, even though it wasn't ideal, like, I had to gain an extra 15, 20 pounds of safety weight to get my period back. And if I drop below it, my period would go again. That's why it took me 6.5 years after the 5 years of initially having it. Because I was like, oh, got my period, let me lose weight now. And it was like, that's not actually how it works. And just kind of sitting with that and, self-pleasure, looking in the mirror, doing the body scans, being able, and I was actually just on a Voxer call this morning with someone that I'm working with that's going through this, where it's like, can you stand naked in front of a mirror and go from your toes to your head without saying a negative comment? Probably not. And like, so I would go through and I would go start from my toes all the way up. And anytime that I would fail at saying, like, if some thought would come in, and it's okay, it doesn't mean it's bad, it's just the awareness of that thought, I would start from the bottom again until I can make it all the way up. And just kind of catching my thoughts, like, what's my first thought when I look in the mirror in the morning? Am I poking at my belly? Am I like doing this to my face and like popping my nose? Like, I don't know, like, what am I doing? Or is it just like, I'm alive? Okay. Can I do a body scan before I look in the mirror? And kind of really starting to be aware of these things. And, I had great teams. I've had mentors. I've had, healers. I've had Reiki. I've had therapists. I've had naturopaths. There's a really good book called Eating Under the Moonlight. It's folk tales around eating disorders, because there's so much science you can have, but then you also want to learn, like, tell me a story about this so it can actually land for me. And then putting them into place. And like, thank goodness for my partnerships and my friendships, but I really do think it's because of the voice that I have around it now, where I can like say, like, my eating disorder brain is acting up right now, like saying things and someone will reflect it back to me. Like, I still do the thing where I'll like a time hop picture will come up and I'll be like, look at those abs. And everyone that I ever say it to, they're like, or malnutrition, stop looking at that. Because they know I didn't do that healthfully. They're like, absolutely not. We're gonna cut that right in the butt right now. But they know that because I told them, right? Like, when I was in my ventral vagus, like, regulated state, I would tell them the stories of the things, and not in a way of like, I'm bleeding onto them. It was like, hey, can you be my sounding board in this? Because I know my eating disorder brain will come in and they'll just kind of reflect things back. But yeah, there's no like, I know I went on a ramble for that, but like, there's no like short answer. It's really just kind of these micro moments where you're like, okay, like, this is the one arena that was enough for me. For me, that started with don't look at the menus, right? And then it was, let me learn about my nervous system. Then it was like, let me catch my thought here. Let me look at myself naked here. Let me have self-pleasure here, and just kind of re-entering pleasure into my life and personal responsibility, because they're the things that eating disorders, we give it up to, right? We don't know what pleasure feels like. We think it's too much. We think we're not deserving of it. We don't know what that feels like. So how can we get into that state? And then we build the trust by continually doing that and taking that responsibility, which also builds that trust.
Okay, thank you for that. And can you give the listeners like a high level description of what it's like to work with you? What sort of things do you do to help? You know, I guess it's a one size does not fit all, obviously, but just an idea of some of the stuff that your clients get to do.
Yeah, so I mean, like right now, right, we have Maven's Metabolism. This is all about repairing the metabolism in a way that is 14-day immersion. I am walking you through step by step. What's the morning, evening, lunch, snack? What does that look like? Because no one taught me that. Like the furthest my education got on nutrition was, here's how to put a fork in your mouth and cut your steak. Like that was it. And then I went into calorie counting. I had no idea. So we work on that. And we also work on recalibrating and reconnecting with our body. Again, those body scan kind of things, but really what it looks like is we start with the foundations, because a lot of us jump into things. What do I not eat is usually the question we start with, right? Let me cut out sugar. Let me cut out gluten. Let me cut out dairy. The reason that stuff doesn't work is we're not looking at what we're doing every single day. So we get to the foundations. What are you doing every single day that's impacting the thing you're trying to change right now? Whether that's anxiety, whether that's trauma, whether that's your IBS, what are you doing every day that's impacting that? And then from there, we start to focus on things that add in. So when it comes to IBS, I focus more on what are the nutrients we have to add in to really support your pancreas, your liver, your natural enzymes production, to get your vagus nerve stimulated, things like that. And we'll be doing that over Voxer, which is that walkie-talkie app, if people don't know what that is. And then we'll have like 1 hour deep dive health history. So I go through the last 3 years of your health history, because I mean, we'll talk about the previous things because it's probably been going on for a long time, but really what I care about is the things that have been going on in the last 3 years. And we'll break that all down in a not so sciencey way so that we can come up with a game plan that's personalized for you. But yeah, there's no like one size fit all. Right now, we're just focusing on metabolism because that's currently what's out. And then we get into relationships, and then we get into anxiety and trauma and things like that throughout the year.
And is it like sort of one-on-one calls as well as, you know, the interaction with Voxer and stuff like that?
Yeah, so we have one-on-one calls, and then it's audio calls. So we'll have bi-weekly calls, because video calls with people, it's very interesting because you get so caught up in this whole like looking at ourselves and making sure when it's like just an audio call, it's just way more freeing. And then the Voxer in between, and then anyone that does the one-on-one or the masterminds also gets access to any of the programs that I run. And I run a program about 1 a month.
Okay. So if anyone listening is relating to this and wants to reach out, where's the best place for them to go?
The typical place, Instagram. And that one it's Laura Patricia Martin. So @ITS Laura Patricia Martin is my personal one. And then our company one is Healing to Happy. So TO Happy.
Okay. So Instagram's the place to go.
Yeah.
And I always like to finish these conversations with anything you feel called to share with the listeners, anything at all.
Yeah. I feel like I'm exhausted this phrase, but it's so true. You cannot be at war with your body and win. Like that has been my biggest life lesson in this world, whether it's the physical pains, whether it's, you know, the mental pains and the struggles and the emotions. Like our body can't heal itself if we're constantly feeling like it's broken or something's wrong with it. Like there are so many treasures in the triggers. We just have to sit down and listen to them. And I know it's scary, and I know it's painful, and I know we want to just swipe it away and like get rid of it. But like when we can actually sit down and get into communication with our body, it becomes the safest place we'll ever be.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, that made a lot of sense. Well, Laura, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and understand a bit more about your journey. And I'm very, very happy for you with your love of your life. And I hope the family comes as you want it to. I'm sure it will. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.